And there's nothing better than witnessing yourself getting better. And that betterment feels delicious. Welcome to Worthiness Wednesday. I'm Perry Gruber, the Enlightenment Guy. For over a decade, I've helped people master their mindsets so they can create lives they love and get results without the burnout or the hustle. And today, I want to talk, as I usually do on Worthiness Wednesdays, about a client experience. This client experience I've talked about before. It's about a guy I'm calling Ken, who is in a loving relationship with his, I'm getting adjusted in my chair, with his partner, who he's been with for many years. Before that, he was married twice. And in his current relationship, his past relationship, his most recent marriage, which ended in divorce, had kept showing up in his current relationship, which is evidence of his powerful momentum created from his marriage. Now, in the positively focused practice, we talk a lot about momentum and belief constellations. Belief constellations are the combination of beliefs we have on a given subject that create spiritual momentum that then causes within us an attraction force, which brings us a physical reality, people and circumstances and events that reflect that belief constellation, those things, those thoughts and beliefs that are dominant in our consciousness. And that's happening on purpose so that we can do something about our inner state of being. And when we do that, then our physical reality, our outward life experience, has to reflect that improvement. That is the process of creating the charmed life that I talk about in the positively focused framework. So this client was having a wonderful experience with his current partner, this client Ken, but every once in a while, his partner would do something and he would interpret what she was doing as though he was still married to that previous person whose name is Christy. And when he did that, when he misinterpreted, when he overlaid his past onto his current relationship, he would experience extreme negative emotion, fear, and insecurity. And he'd experience those emotions for several reasons. One, because he was misinterpreting his current experience for past experience. And number two, those negative emotions were trying to clue him in on the negative momentum he had from his marriage with Christy. Now, his relationship with Christy was fraught with a lot of really beneficial, but most people would say extremely negative experiences. Those experiences were trying to give both Christy and my client Ken a clue with regard to the reality they were both creating. Christy came from a very dysfunctional family, had a lot of negative momentum in it, and the parents created circumstances along with Christy. It was a co-creation, of course, that caused Christy to come to very disempowering conclusions about herself, which is typical in almost every family when parents lose their cool and fall out of love with their children, which is what they're doing when they're yelling at or punishing their children. They have lost the love for their children in that moment. When they do that, the children almost invariably conclude that something must be wrong with them. And that's what happened with Christy. And over time, as she developed that powerful negative momentum, she began to attract experiences in her life, including illnesses that showed up in her body and accidents that would show up in her life experience that were trying to clue her in for her to soothe those negative stories about herself so that she could improve her life experience. But she didn't know this. And so as she moved through her life experience, she began to experience more and more negative experiences alongside positive experiences. Now, this is important to realize. We are all pure positive energy. And so because of that, because that pure positive energy tends to dominate for most people's lives contain a combination of what humans would call good things and bad things happening in their lives, which are reflecting back to them the positive and the negative beliefs that they have. And since we're all pure positive energy, the dominant momentum in most of our lives is positive, which means our lives tend to get better, even when we are focusing on negative experiences or negative belief constellations. And so Christy's life was getting better and better, but it was also infused with a lot of negative experiences. One of the things that Christy wanted to realize in her life was a marriage. And so when she met my client Ken, and Ken met Christy, they eventually co-created exactly that. And in that relationship, in that marriage, this is really good. Christy was confronted with all of the old beliefs she had developed up until then, manifesting in the form of her husband, Ken. Now, Ken had his own belief constellations, his own momentum going on, which is what made him a match to Christy. But from Ken's perspective, Ken's family relationship wasn't as bad as Christy, but there were some experiences in his childhood that caused him to question his own self-worth. And so this is what made him a match to Christy. The momentum that Christy had and the momentum that Ken had were not equal, but they were a match, which is what brought them together. So in the marriage, while Ken was trying to create a life for Ken and Christy that was positive, Christy was focused only on the negative experiences she was having, which is why at some point in her marriage, she ended up injuring her back and so much that she could no longer work. And that's when the beginning of the end of the marriage got underway. One of the things Ken and I discovered about Christy in our sessions together was that Christy really didn't want to work. She wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, but she never revealed that to Ken until she got injured. And of course, by this time, Ken was neck deep into the relationship. And so he was resentful of her unwillingness to go back to work. And as his resentment built, that's an internal condition, Christy began to reflect that back to Ken in the form of her own resentment. She started berating him and criticizing him and essentially getting to the point of hating him. Now, from Christy's perspective, you have to understand that this relationship was a co-creation, as all relationships are. Everyone in every party of a relationship, each party, is 100% responsible for the relationship they're experiencing. So what Christy wasn't aware of until it got really clear to her was that Ken offered everything Christy wanted in a partner. And so she was in love with him. But she also could not bear being in that relationship because she didn't believe she deserved it. And she didn't believe she deserved it because she had extreme self-loathing, self-hatred happening within her as a result of her family experience. And so instead of being able to be present to her self-loathing and do something about it, she instead projected her self-loathing as hatred onto Ken, which bewildered the bejesus out of Ken. He could not understand why, at the time, why she was being this way. But in our sessions, this became more and more clear to Ken. Now, why was it important to go back and look at his marriage? Why was it important for Ken to go and look at his marriage with Christy? The reason why is because at the end of his marriage, he ended up paying Christy, as part of the divorce, $1 million. And to Ken, money was a significant thing based on his upbringing, where his family, when he was a child, went kind of from riches to rags as his father's career kind of imploded. And so Ken had vowed never to have that experience happen to him. And so he was very careful with money and was very successful in accumulating it. And so paying Christy $1 million as part of the divorce was something Ken never wanted to do, and he was extremely bitter about it. And in his current relationship, that constantly came up. And in my past conversation, my past video about Ken and his current relationship, I talked about how the past coming up was negatively impacting his current partner's way of being. She was beginning to demonstrate, reflect back to Ken his dominant momentum on the subject of Christy. And this is why it was important for he and I to go back and unpack some of what was going on with Christy. So I asked Ken to create a list of all the negative beliefs he had about Christy. This was about 4 weeks ago, maybe 5 weeks ago. And he didn't do it for 4 of those 5 weeks, maybe 3 of those 5 weeks. And the reason why he didn't do it, is because the resistance, he had so much resistance about that experience, the negative momentum of his relationship with Christy, that he could not bear to look at inside of him the pain that existed alongside the momentum. So he avoided it for 3 or 4 weeks. Finally, he decided he had to do something about it. He was so clear that the righteous indignation he felt, the victimhood feeling he felt of being a victim of his marriage. He wasn't a victim, but that's the way he perceived it, and that's why he was righteously indignant. He realized that the righteous indignance of his beliefs about his marriage was too much to bear. He was ready to let it go. So the next session, about 2 weeks ago, he presented me with a list of some really beautiful beliefs that he had written down about Christy and the marriage. And so I asked him if he could come up with better feeling beliefs for each of the beliefs he had written down. And he struggled with that for a couple of weeks until finally, last week, he came to the session with his homework completed. He had finished coming up with some more positive beliefs about his relationship with his marriage with Christy and about Christy herself. For example, he had written, Christy never wanted to work. She just wanted to laze around the house. So that's a pretty negative interpretation of what was really going on for Christy. A better feeling story he created was Christy couldn't work because she was in too much physical pain from the back injury. That was a really good change, a better feeling thought that moved Ken into a better vibration on the subject of Christy. So we took these really negative beliefs he had written down, and for each one we came up with just a little bit. It didn't have to be a large leap, but just a little bit better belief corresponding to each of the really negative beliefs he had, which got Ken into a greater level of acceptance of what was going on in his relationship, in his marriage. And at that point, I said to him, Are you beginning to see how this was a co-creation, and that the love you may have felt for Christy has been totally displaced by the righteous indignation that you have? And he could agree with that. And then I said, there was something that had you be a match to who Christy was being at that time, which is why you were in the marriage. Can you put your finger on what it was that had you be a match? And because of the momentum of his righteous indignation, I could see him bristle in response to my suggesting that he was a match to her. But after a little while, after a little bit of talking, where he got to, which was so beautiful, was that Ken realized that there were many opportunities prior to the circumstances that led up to Christy getting injured and then her becoming dependent on Ken. There were many signals telling Ken that he needed to get out of the relationship. But the reason he could not see them back then is because he was in a scarcity mindset about women. He did not believe, this is what he told me, he did not believe that he could find another woman to be with. And that's what made him a match to Christy. Christy was deep in a lack of worthiness relative to her upbringing. Ken was in a sense of worthiness relative to his ability to find a match, the kind of match that he wanted. The great thing about Ken moving through that story was that he was moving through a process, and Christy was supporting that process of him discovering, and this is so good, discovering that indeed the relationship he was having with Christy was helping him realize that he is worth having what he wants, a beautiful relationship. And that's what he ended up with his current partner. So once he got that, he could see how Christy was not a devil who had come to steal his money and to wreck his life. She was actually an angel who supported Ken in his expansion. And Ken did the same thing for Christy. But unfortunately, Christy doesn't have something like the positively focused framework that allows her to perceive what had happened in her marriage to Ken in a way that supports her expansion. Instead, she continues to double down on projecting her self-hatred onto Ken decades after the marriage has ended. Every relationship is a co-creation. Every person we come into contact with is an angel. Each of us serves as an angel to others. We are constantly reflecting back to those people, and those people are constantly reflecting back to us the depths of the beliefs, thoughts, and momentum we have about a large number of things. And this is why it's so important to know what my clients discover in the positively focused practice. Our reality is not separate from us. It is not an objective reality that just happens to us. The physical reality that we see with our eyes and experience with our bodies is a projection. It's a reflection of what's going on inside of us. It's a divine experience enabling us to perceive viscerally the collection of vibrations that make up who we are. And in being able to perceive it, we can do something about it. We can improve the collection of vibrations inside of us, and as a result of that, experience improved life conditions. But the key here, the goal of this wonderful manifestation system, this vibrational system, isn't to create charmed lives, although that's a good outcome, But the goal of this system, this interaction between subject and object, which is duality that doesn't really exist because it's all one. The purpose of it is to tune ourselves, to learn to tune ourselves into becoming that pure, positive energy being that we are, in a way that that pure, positive energy orientation becomes chronic. And in doing so, we gradually become the gods that we are. That's what each and every one of us is. We're gods in human form. We come into this physical reality in order to have an experience that allows us to perceive and become more of what we are. And in that way, life on earth is such a gift. You can say it's a kind of training ground, but that implies that someone is delivering the training. What it really is a magnificent, joyful, expansive experience we give to ourselves as we are expanding along an eternal trajectory, constantly becoming more aligned, more positive, more joyful, more the eternal being that we know we are. And we're doing it across infinite dimensions. I love knowing this. I know Ken's loving knowing this, which is why at the end of our session, he asked for the recording so that he could allow what we talked about to seep deeper into his consciousness. Because the things I talk with clients about in the positively focused practice are deep and profound and life-changing. And when they embrace those profundities, their life reflects that, which means their life gets better. But again, it's not so much about the life, although that's great. What it's really about is about them getting better. And there's nothing better than witnessing yourself getting better. And that betterment feels delicious. I love this practice, and I love sharing it here on YouTube and in my blog. Feel free to like or subscribe if you wish. You don't have to. You've come to this video in perfect divine timing, and it will happen again. And when it does, I'll see you in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.